Now, today we begin a new sermon series entitled EMBARK. And EMBARK, if you think about that word as that first hits you, it usually means you're leaving on a trip, or maybe you're getting aboard a boat, or you're going somewhere, and that's intentional. We want you to think about what's ahead for you in your life and what adventures are ahead. And we're going to cover things like, what does it mean to assemble your crew, to have the crew together that you need in order to make the journeys ahead for you, and what's beyond the horizon, and what does it mean to actually make the journey beyond what you can see and into the unknown of life, and then how to navigate it, how to pick your course and plot your course about where you need to go. But today we're going to talk about, how do you leave the dock? I mean, getting going is sometimes the hardest thing to do, taking that first step and really making the beginning of your journey. It's sometimes the most challenging part of it, making that decision that you're actually going to step forward and going to do something. And so I want to focus on the start today, because the beginning, while it can be filled with anxiety, is also filled with excitement. It's a lot of fun when you stop and think about, you're going on a trip, you're going to make a journey, you're going on vacation, or maybe you're going on some other type of trip that you're on. I mean, think about the energy you have those days leading up to it as you're trying to get everything done. And somehow, magically, you get more done in the last 2 days before you leave for a vacation than you had gotten done in the previous 2 weeks. It's just amazing, the energy and the focus that we have when we're starting on a new journey for us in life. But think about your trips in the past, when you've spent time getting ready for them, planning for them, imagining them. Maybe it's a vacation, or maybe it's an excursion where you're going to learn something, or maybe it's even a work trip for you. But think about the thought process you went through as you started planning it and thinking about it and imagining what you'd be doing and trying to prepare and put all the right things in your luggage, the ability to be able to continue to work towards a successful launch as you embark on that trip. I personally love boats. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy being on a boat. I don't care if it's a big cruise liner or if something small. I don't care what it is. I enjoy being on boats. I particularly love the start when you're on a boat. You've just pushed off from the dock and you rev the engine and it starts to move forward. And if it's a smaller boat, the front end kind of lifts up as you're beginning to move across the water. And then as you gain speed, it starts to plane out and level out. And then you're just cruising along across the water. And on those days when the water is smooth and the wind is low, and you're just kind of cutting across the glass, looking at all the reflections of life around you in the water, that's kind of my happy place. Love getting to do that. Now, not every time when we start off on an adventure, we start off on a journey of life, does it turn out the way we think it's going to. It's not always going to go as planned. In fact, I would dare say rarely does it all go as planned. About a little over 30 years ago, a friend of mine, who is a dear friend today, but back then we were just kind of getting to know each other, and we started talking with each other about, we like to fish. We really wanted to fish. Now, we were early in our careers. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any time. We didn't have any of those things. And so we both finally organized, after talking about this for months, that we were going to go fishing together on Lake Purdy. Now, I want to ask, how many of you have ever fished on Lake Purdy? Okay, more than I thought I would probably get in this group, all right? If you haven't done that before, it's actually owned by Alabama Power. It's a little bitty lake down south of Birmingham, and you can rent little flat bottom boats. You can have a small outboard motor on it if you bring your own. You can have a trolling motor out there. It's very limited in what you can do. My father, that's where I learned to love fishing. My father and I would go there a lot. My father knew absolutely nothing about fishing, and we rarely caught anything. But every time we'd be coming back in, I'd look at him and I'd say, but I sure had a good time because I wanted him to bring me the next time he went fishing. And we did that many times. So my friend Bill and I, we decided we'd go fishing on Lake Martin. I had my dad's old outboard motor, a little small trolling motor that I was bringing. And we got there. We got the boat loaded up. We rented the boat. We put the motors on. We got everything hooked up and ready to go. I started up that little motor, which always has run just perfectly the whole time we've ever used it. And it started right up. And now I do want to say when we arrived, we both noted it was kind of windy. Now, by kind of windy, I mean white caps on Lake Purdy, looking a little bit like the Gulf. And we looked around and noticed there were plenty of boats to choose from to rent that day because I don't think any other boats had been rented. And we got loaded up. We started up the engine. I put it in reverse. We're backing on out. And as soon as I went to put the motor into forward, it died. I cranked it back up. It started right back up. But as soon as I put it into gear, it died again. It'd run for about 3 or 4 seconds over and over again. I'm sitting there just wearing myself out, pulling this cord on this motor, starting it up. And this whole time, there's this gale force wind that is taking us away from the launch and down the lake. Finally, I realized we have traveled hundreds of yards and are gaining speed. And so I put the trolling motor down, full speed. We're still losing ground. The wind is winning. Finally, I look at my friend Bill and I said, I think we're going to have to head into shore and we can figure out what to do there. So I turned the motor. We kind of losing ground, but making it towards shore. We eventually beach it on the shore. We can't get the motor to run. I mean, it starts, but it just won't run. No matter what we do, we finally manually walk the boat up the shoreline, back to the launch, beach it. But we have been thinking and dreaming about going fishing for months. So we're not smart enough to call it a day. We go up and we talk to the guy who we rented the boat from. He gives us a different can of gas, said maybe your gas is bad. Sure enough, start the motor right up. It's running great. We back out again. We're all excited. Put it in forward and it dies again. And we repeat the entire scenario all over again. We walk the boat back up to the launch. We get it grounded. I'm looking at Bill. Bill's looking at me. And it is then that he realizes he has lost his wedding ring. The guy who rented us the boat came out and said, y'all aren't foolish enough to try this again, are you? It said, you'll notice nobody else has rented a boat today. Nobody else is on the water. You're the only ones trying to do this. He said, if you're going to try it again, you can try one of our motors, see if it works any better. I looked at him and I said, I think we're done. We're looking for a wedding ring right now. Now, Bill and I never found his wedding ring. We never got out to go fishing. About 2 weeks ago, we had lunch, which we do regularly and have since that day. We sometimes retell that story and laugh about it and joke about it. We've been fishing other times that went much better than that. But many times, the very thing we have planned that we think is going to be fun or enjoyable or good becomes something very different than what we had planned. But nonetheless, we formed a bond with one another on that day, on and off of Lake Purdy. We found that going through those things together and the ability to laugh at ourselves, to enjoy the story and the trip, even though it was nothing like what we expected, became a bonding experience for us. Something that for more than 30 years, we've been able to carry with us. Some of the greatest literature that has ever been written begins with people setting out on an adventure together, and things do not go as planned, and they face challenges and trials. They come out on the other side of those trials bonded and changed. We love to read about those adventures, but in honesty, we don't really want them to happen to us. We want life to flow smoothly for us. We want the script we have in our head to be the one that actually plays out before us with no trials and no challenges, smooth sailing all the way through. But of course, that's not life. I mean, there are times that go well for us, but there are an awful lot of times where things don't go as we have planned. I mean, think about some of the great literature that you've read or heard about that has two people beginning on a journey. You have Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, who begin on a great journey, one that is both mental, humorous at times, and at the same time more real than we want to express. Frodo Baggins and Sam Gamgee, who begin in Lord of the Rings their journey together, and they literally walk through what would be described as hell itself together. But their bond is forever forged with one another. Huckleberry Finn and a freed slave, Jim, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Often there are people that journey through things together that they do not see coming, but it is the journey itself that binds them together and pulls them closer to one another. Not one of these stories are without their own detours and dramas, and if they were, we wouldn't read them. We wouldn't remember them. It is the trials and the dramas and the challenges once the journey that has begun that makes the story interesting and engaging. It makes the story worth reading. The stories in our Bible are the same way. The stories of every person in the Bible has a beginning of an adventure, whether it's an encounter of God or encounter of people. And usually there are multiple detours and dramas involved with the story. If they didn't, they wouldn't be much of a testimony to their faith and trust in God. A relationship with God would be simple then. Everything goes well. But that's not the story we read in the Bible. I want to invite you to use your imagination, to allow yourself to really immerse yourselves in some of the scenes of adventure in the Bible. Imagine you are a former Egyptian slave and you are leaving Egypt and following Moses. You have reached the edge of the land that you know of, and soldiers are closing in. And the sea before you parts, and a pathway lies before you into an unknown land. Imagine how it is going to feel as you take that first step off of the familiar ground that you've been on into the land that has been opened for you. Imagine what it feels like to begin that journey from where you have been into a wilderness that eventually will lead you to a promised land. What do you feel as the sea parts and the pathway lies before you? What does it feel like to take that first step, to embark on that new journey? Or fast forward a little bit. How do you think Joshua felt as he stood looking at the River Jordan, seeing the promised land on the other side, a promised land that had once been described as holding giants, too big to conquer, and fear that held you back. But now the water is providing a safe path for you to cross over and to enter into what you have dreamed about for years and years, what has been talked about and promised. What does it feel like to begin to take that next step to be in that place where what has been hoped for is about to be fulfilled. Or maybe you fast forward to the time that Jeremiah is talking about, the time when the exile is over. Persia has beat the Babylonians, and God is inviting God's people back to Jerusalem, back to Israel, to come back to their home and promised lands. They have been scattered for 70 years, and they are being called back. And there is this young man who has never seen Jerusalem in his life, and he is a cupbearer to the king. His name is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, in hearing about the downfall of Jerusalem, of all that has been torn apart and that is no longer as it once had been, for 3 days hits his knees in prayer to prepare himself for what he feels like the journey and pathway God is calling him